Choosing Love by ginnyrules27, Chapter 30. And before I get started, guys, this one is seriously dark and it deals with very horrible themes of grief and finding a loved one's body in a very bad state. So please, viewer discretion is highly advised. I'm actually doing this one early just so I can get it out of the way. Ryan tightened his belt as he left the crew's quarters and started to make his way down the gangplank. The food barge had just arrived, meaning they were likely having a doozy of a time cleaning up the trampled bodies that were usually a side effect. Lately, though, the crowds had been getting bigger and bigger, ever since that old bat had come to the Isle. It was as if the residents were expecting a change in the food quality. Ryan wasn't exactly sure why they were expecting that. 20+ years hadn't changed anything about the food they ate. Why would a new resident? But then again, there hadn't been a new resident in over 20 years, with the exception of the babies born on the Isle. Though Mal had been trying hard to get some decent food sent over to the Isle. Mal and Duma both, in fact, from what they had told the crew the last time they were over on the Isle. "Hey, fair warning. It looks like it's a bad one," Nick warned him as they made their way to the barge. "Gods, how many people showed up this time?" "It looks like a third of the Isle," Ryan sighed, though he knew realistically it was probably a lot less than that. The hyenas are sure eating well tonight, that's for sure. "Hell, the lions and Shere Khan, his girlfriend and son might eat well tonight as well." Jake nodded. "I don't think there are enough hyenas to eat all these people before they start decaying." "And on that morbid note, let's get started," Henry told them. "I'll talk to the barge attendants, see if there was any trouble. Well, besides the usual mess. You lot start clearing up the bodies. Remember, our people and anyone 12 or under get a pirate burial. Everyone else is fair game for the hyenas." Derek nodded. "I think I've given that order too many times." Henry shook his head, his red hair flopping into his blue eyes. "It's the life of the Isle." Nick shrugged, and the three boys split off to look over the bodies of the people who had simply wanted a chance to secure a month of decent food. Jake and Dustin were going off in other direction in order to save time. Never before had it sunk in just how lucky Ryan was when he had to clean up the barge after a delivery. He was a rat. He had the ability to access Lord Hades' restaurant or Ursula's, if for some reason he was bored with the Greek food. The other gangs didn't have that, and the gods forbid you were a gangless guy or girl on the Isle. Ryan paused as he came across a familiar teal blue coat, one that had formerly been Uma's before she outgrew it and added it to the storage pile in case they got any new girls to their crew. No. She'd been so certain she'd be fine. That she'd be able to weave in and out of the mob. That she wouldn't have been touched. "Christy?" Ryan whispered as he ran over to her, kneeling down by her body. "Christy, come on! Stop playing around! You've got to wake up!" He knew Nick, Derek, Jake and Henry were probably looking at him. He knew the hyenas were probably waiting for them to clear out so they could eat. But Ryan didn't care. All he knew was that he held his little sister in his arms, her tiny body broken beyond almost all recognition. And she wasn't waking up. "Come on! Christy, come on! Please, wake up!" Ryan urged, shaking Christy a little in his quest to get his little sister to open her eyes, to give him a playful little smirk at the realization that he had been worried about her. Yeah, he had been mad at her for a second for playing a prank like that, but it wouldn't matter because she'd be alive. Minutes passed, and her eyes didn't move. Her lungs didn't fill with air, and Ryan's ears didn't hear the melodious sound of her laugh. The sound that came from Ryan's lips as he realized his sister wasn't waking up couldn't exactly be described as human. "Wake up! Christy!" Ryan shouted, and Derek and Nick came running over. Tears prickled in Ryan's green eyes as he continued to shake and urge Christy to wake up. "Ryan, mate, you gotta let her go. There's nothing you can do now. We'll take care of her," Derek said, keeping his voice low to prevent anyone from overhearing. He wanted to give his friend privacy, even if he was yelling at the top of his lungs. "Get off me, Derek!" Ryan snapped before turning back to the girl, his voice dissolving beyond the pained scream as he urged the girl to wake up. "Christy! Please! You gotta wake up!" Henry sighed as he quickly made his way over from the barge, more than a little concerned for his best friend. As gently as he could, he started to pry Ryan's grip from the dead girl. "Henry, don't you touch her!" Ryan exclaimed, struggling against Derek and Nick's grip. "She's not dead! Christy!" The pain in Ryan's voice would be a sound Henry would never be able to get out of his head, no matter how hard he tried. She's not dead! She can't be!" Ryan shouted, wrenching his shoulder from Derek's grasp as he continued to shake Christy, her body flopping like a rag doll in his grip. "Christine! Wake up!" "Right, we've got to. Come on. It's okay. I'll make sure she's taken care of," Henry said softly as he looked over at Derek in concern. Their best friend seemed to be completely beyond reason at this point. She's not gone! She's just sleeping or pulling a prank or something!" Ryan shouted, but as his little sister continued to remain motionless, something in him snapped. It was as if part of his brain finally accepted it, even as the other part valiantly fought to deny his reality. He slumped forward, and Nick and Derek caught him before he landed in a pile of bodies that surrounded them. "Nick, Derek, get him out of here," Henry said, making sure the order was as gentle as possible. "Jake, Dustin and I can finish up here." "Guys, no, don't. I'm fine," Ryan said softly as Derek started to lead him back to the ship. "Guys, seriously. Guys, get off me. No. Henry, don't you touch her. She's not dead. Guys." Gods, I don't know who this girl is, but if CJ catches him carrying on like this, she'll be jealous for sure. Nick muttered to Derek, "If my hands weren't full of making sure my best mate didn't run back there, I'd hit you," Derek said shortly. Ryan was scrambling against their grip, acting almost like a determined badger than a 14-year-old boy. It was clear that the girl had meant something to their friend, and Derek wasn't going to let anyone in the crew taint her memory for Ryan. They made their way back to the ship, and CJ scurried over to them, concern evident in her eyes. "What happened?" she asked, looking at Derek. "Harriet said there was a stampede at the barge, but she didn't give any details." "Let me get Ryan to the crew's quarters, and I'll fill you in then," Ryan promised. "Do the captain's quarters," Harriet said as she walked up. "Henry won't mind, and something's clearly bothering Ryan. The crew's quarters aren't the best for privacy, and the captain's quarters has a door that locks." Derek nodded, and the four of them made their way to the captain's quarters. Mal and Uma had taken up lodging here when they weren't spending the night in their clubhouse or with their parents. After Uma left to go to Oridon, Henry had reluctantly taken up lodging to free up a mattress in the crew's quarters. But 9 times out of 10, the quarters remained empty as Ryan spent the night with the crew in their quarters. After all, as he liked to say, he was only the acting captain. "Rye, it's okay," CJ said softly as they led Ryan to one of the 2 beds. Tears spilled silently from Ryan's face as he shook his head, wiping fiercely out his cheeks, as if to deny the existence of the tears. His sister, his baby sister, she was gone. If only he hadn't wasted so much time in asking Henry if she could join the crew. He hadn't planned on asking him, not until she was 13. A pirate's life wasn't the best, and she was still an innocent beam of sunshine. The Isle hadn't squashed that love of life from her yet. And then this morning. Gods, this morning. What do you mean you have a new ally? Ryan asked as he turned to look at his sister. Exactly that, Christy nodded. I'm just like you now, right? I've got my own crew. Ryan shook his head. His sister was rather sheltered for someone from the Isle. He had made it so she didn't have to deal with the nastiness that the crew dealt with. Ryan! Be there in a minute, Derek! Ryan called back. Despite the fact that he often slept on the ship, there were days when he spent the night with his dad and sister. He didn't avoid his home because he had a bad relationship with either of them, but because it might put a target on Christy if anyone knew he was connected to her. He's not that bad, Ryan, Christy told him. You should at least meet him. What's he look like? I might have already done that, Ryan said. Tall, black hair, grey eyes. Freddie! Ryan exclaimed, turning and looking directly at Christy. Your ally is Freddie Frollo! Christy rolled her eyes. I know you have your issues with him, but really, he's not that bad. He suggested I make a run to get food from the barge this month, rather than you, since you do so much for the family. Christy, you stay away from him! Freddie is nothing but trouble, Ryan snapped. Oh, it was a good thing she'd be getting off the Isle. He had already made plans to get her an application sent in with the rest of them. I'm 12, not 2. You can't tell me who I can and can't talk to. Christy snapped back at him. I can't believe you, Ryan. You always come here complaining when the crew treats you like a child, and now you're doing the same thing with me. I'm just trying to protect you. Well, stop. I don't need your protection, Christy told him. I'm going to the barge, and I'll get the food. I'm smaller than you. I'll be able to weave in and out of the mob. Before Ryan could say anything, she stormed out of the house. Shaking his head in frustration, Ryan walked out to meet Derek. The pair walked up to the ship in silence, Derek looking at his friend in concern as Ryan fumed. Henry? Ryan asked as he got on deck. Can I have a word? Well, of course. In private? Ryan added. He was asking a lot sooner than he wanted, but if Freddie was going after his sister, Ryan knew his plans meant nothing. His sister's safety was everything right now. Sure, Henry nodded, looking at Derek in slight confusion, but the other boy could only shrug. The pair of them walked into the captain's quarters and closed the door. What's up, bro? Henry asked, turning to the smaller boy. Ryan sighed. I was wondering if we could bring a new member into the crew. Depends on who it is, Henry stated. This person wouldn't be the reason you've been acting so odd now, is it? You noticed that? Ryan, you've been sneaking off the ship with food and taking clothes that in no way could fit you, considering they're usually Uma's or Sammy's old things. I think even the Gaston twins will notice you're being strange. Ryan sighed. He thought he had been careful to not be noticed by anyone. CJ certainly hadn't said anything, as she was one of his best friends. I have a little sister, Ryan said after a minute or two of silence. She's 12, and I want to make sure she's safe and secure right now. Henry shook his head. Ryan, you know we always have room for new members, especially if that new member is a sibling of an existing crew member. The Hook siblings are the best example of that. At some point, I want to know why you felt the need to keep her a secret from us, or how I didn't know about her before now. But that doesn't matter right now. Go get her. Yes, Henry, Ryan nodded. He had expected he'd have to explain his reasoning at some point, but that didn't matter right now. He could keep Freddie from her. A pounding on the door broke Ryan out of his thoughts, and Henry quickly strode over and opened the door. Stampede at the barge, Derek said, and Ryan felt his blood run cold. His sister was at the barge. She wouldn't be. No, she'd be fine. She had to be. CJ gently rubbed Ryan's back as he buried his face into her shoulder, desperately trying to keep the tears at bay, despite the fact they had already been escaping his face and were flowing freely down it. My fault,
my fault,
Ryan muttered, his voice so soft it was only audible to CJ.
What was your fault?
CJ asked, holding him close.
She's dead. She can't be dead, though. I talked to her just an hour ago. She was probably going to come up with the gangplank with Henry.
CJ looked over at Derek, Nick and Harry in concern. What's he talking about? Who's dead?
His sister,
Henry said as he slipped into the quarters, having used the key he kept as acting captain. He sat down on Ryan's other side and Jenny rested a hand on his shoulder.
She's not. She was fine.
She's in the brig, ready for one of the girls to prep for burial.
Henry said softly.
Ryan, I'm so sorry. She would have been a good crew member.
Ryan shook his head and bit his lip, as if trying to stay strong in front of the older boys in the crew. CJ continued to rub Ryan's back, but sat in silence.
I should have been there,
Ryan said softly.
I could have pulled her out of there.
Ryan, if you had been there, you might have gotten crushed too,
Henry said, keeping his voice gentle.
You saw all the bodies that were there.
Harriet shook her head. A good captain Henry might be, but clearly he didn't know the right words to say to someone who was hurting. The last thing Ryan would have wanted was be thinking about his sister in the belly of a hyena, or crushed by the feet of an older Isle dweller. Ryan, trust me, Harriet said softly as she knelt down in front of the younger boy, the same way she would have done for Harry or CJ. I never met your sister, but she wouldn't want you to be beating yourself up over this.
We got into a fight,
Ryan said, his voice still incredibly soft.
Before I got on the ship. And I'll never get to take those words back. Never get to tell her I didn't mean them.
What were the words?
Nick asked.
They don't matter,
Derek interrupted quickly.
Ryan, trust me. The words you told your sister don't matter. Your sister knows you cared for her, and that you'd do anything to make sure she was safe.
Clearly, considering none of us knew she existed until now. Nick muttered and winced as Derek whacked him over the head. You've decided to take Dustin's role as a prat today, haven't you? Derek shook his head and sighed, as Ryan seemed to almost curl into a small ball, his arms wrapped around his knees and pulling them close to his body.
Right. You can cry,
Henry said softly.
You really think anyone here is going to judge you for that? You just found your sister's body, after she died in probably the most horrendous way possible.
How old was she? Harriet asked.
12,
Ryan told her, choking back a sob. Harriet gave him a sad smile. You don't have to be strong, Ryan. Do you really think that if Sammy found Squeaky or Squirmy's bodies after a stampede at the barge, that she'd be even able to form a complete sentence? Do you think that if anything happened to Harry or CJ, that I wouldn't be tearing off the head of the person who had hurt them? Do you think Uma wouldn't be sending tidal waves into the Isle if Celia got hurt? And do you know Mal would be introducing the idiot who thought it was a good idea to hurt Hattie with a fireball without thinking? Ryan shook his head again.
You're not going to be weak. Not in front of two captains. Not in front of your best mates. You're a pirate of the Isle of the Lost. You do not cry. You cry, you die. Remember?
But as much as he might, he just couldn't keep the tears at bay. He buried his face into his knees and his shoulders began to shake with silent sobs. None of the other crew members said anything, Derek and Nick leaning against the door to prevent anyone from barging in and to give Ryan as much privacy as possible. Henry rested a gentle hand on Ryan's back.
Let it out, mate,
he thought.
I'm right here. It's all right. You're not weak. You're just a sibling. A grieving sibling.
The crew continued to remain silent, even as Ryan's sobs grew to be audible. They knew their crewmate, and knew that Ryan would probably try to stop the sobs if they said anything. And bottling everything up wouldn't be healthy.
You don't have to stay here,
Ryan whispered, turning his head over to look at Henry.
You really think I'm going to leave you alone when you're upset?
Henry asked.
You're acting captain, Henry. There's stuff that matters more than me.
Nothing that comes to mind,
Henry told him and gently rubbed his back. Ryan was the closest thing that Henry had to a little brother. Even if he wasn't, there was no way he'd leave him alone when he was upset like this. Even if there was a small part of him that yearned to check Dragon Hall and make sure Claudine was okay like he always did after a delivery, Ryan came first. He's right, Henry. Harriet nodded.
You're both captains.
I'm also an older sister. Harriet said, older sibling trumps captain. Every time. And you're my best mate. CJ nodded. I'm staying here as long as you need me, Rai. Wild seahorses couldn't drag me away.
Don't look at me, mate, Derek said. I'm staying no matter what.
You all can't stay, Ryan whispered. What if someone in the crew needs you?
Nick shrugged. They're all big boys and girls.
But if it makes you feel better, Rai, I'll go and be acting first mate or something.
Sammy's out there, and she's my first mate, Harriet stated. If anyone needs anything from one of us, she knows how to handle it.
That's not fair to her, though, Nick pointed out, especially if she's looking after her brothers too.
Harriet gave Nick a small smile. If you're sure, Nick. I'm sure, Nick told her. He didn't really know what he was doing in there anyway. Henry was acting captain, and he and Derek were Ryan's best mates, alongside CJ. Plus, there was the fact that everyone knows CJ and Ryan would end up together. And Harriet may not have been the closest to Ryan, but she could provide some insight as an older sibling herself. But what Nick could do was go make sure no one bothered them. Give Ryan the time to grieve in private.
Is Ryan alright?
Jake asked as soon as Nick slipped out of the quarters and closed the door. How do you... Bonnie was in the crow's nest when you, Derek, and Ryan returned. Jake explained.
Everyone's concerned.
Nick sighed and turned to look at his best mate. You know how Ryan's been sneaking off with food and clothing?
Yeah, I thought we were going to do an intervention with him on that. There's no need anymore. Turns out that was for his sister. Ryan's got a sister.
Nick sighed as he looked at the closed door of the captain's quarters. Had a sister. She was at the barge today, Jake.
Oh, gods.
Nick sighed. Read my mind there. Nick nodded. He's really shook up, Jake.
Understandable, of course, but I don't know. I've never seen him like this.
The crew will be with him, Jake promised. Come on, let's let the others know. That way Ryan doesn't have to talk about it if he doesn't want to. Nick nodded, and the two of them scurried off to talk to the rest of the crew. They'd make sure Ryan was taken care of. The rats looked after their own after all. End of chapter. Hi guys, I hope you enjoyed that because oh my god, that was hard.
She was 12! 12! And Ryan's only 14! Holy moly! Like, I've got a younger brother, so I'm probably gonna go and find him and give him a hug after this. Oh my lord.
But onto what I do love. As you guys know, I hate when horrid things happen to the characters I love. But I like how the other characters react, and this chapter is a good example of that. Henry and Harriet, CJ, Nick, Derek, Jake, all of them, they've got his back, and they're just letting him cry. Just God. And Freddie Frollo better count his days. That boy. Well, you guys already know how I feel about him. Not to mention, he could have wanted a fling with her, and we've established he's already interested in 13-year-olds. This girl was 12. 12. If she had survived, who knows what he would have done to her. Anyway, you guys know the drill by this point. Like, comment and subscribe, hit the bell to get notified for when I upload a new video, and remember to have a good day, night, or whatever time zone you're in. Bye my guys, gals, and non-binary pals. I'll see you in another video. Take care.